Please leave a comment where you are watching from. I was 14 the first time I felt like the world was really mine, even for a few hours. Not in the big, life-changing way people describe when they get their driver's license or graduate or whatever. No, it was smaller than that. More intimate. More dangerous. It was a Saturday afternoon in early fall. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of burning leaves. I remember standing in the living room of our house in Knollview Heights, barefoot, a steaming cup of instant cocoa in one hand, and a YouTube video playing quietly on the TV. Outside, the wind shuffled the last of summer's warmth into the trees, and I could hear the faint buzz of someone mowing a lawn down the street. My parents had taken my younger brother, Milo, to some weekend-long festival out in Eads Hollow. Something to do with model trains, a hobby my dad was obsessed with and tried to pass down to Milo, who, to be fair, was kind of into it. I wasn't. So when they asked if I wanted to come, I just shrugged and said no. My mom hesitated. "You sure you'll be okay here by yourself? We'll be gone most of the day." "Yes," I said quickly. Probably too quickly. They left around 10 a.m., and for the first time, I was truly, utterly alone in the house. No one yelling, no footsteps overhead, no little brother barging in to show me his latest drawing. Just me. It was beautiful. I spent the first couple of hours watching movies on the couch, flipping through games I never had time to play, and singing along to music way too loud. I even made an epic sandwich, ham, cheese, pickles, chips inside like a rebel, and ate it with my feet on the coffee table like some kind of adult. But after a while, the quiet started getting heavy. I checked my phone and saw that my friend Iver was hanging out with a few other kids at his house just a few blocks away. Iver was a weird but fun guy, always wearing mismatched socks and carrying a Rubik's Cube he could never solve. His mom was out, and they were watching scary movies and goofing around. I hesitated for all of 10 seconds. I wasn't supposed to leave. My mom had been clear, stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone. Lock everything. But it was bright outside. Safe. Harmless. I threw on a jacket, slipped on my sneakers, and left. In my excitement, I forgot the one thing I wasn't supposed to forget. I didn't lock the front door. I was at Iver's place for about 3 hours. We watched a dumb horror flick about a haunted highway that made absolutely no sense, ate leftover Halloween candy, and tried to prank call his crush. He chickened out halfway through the call. It was exactly what I needed, stupid fun, a break from my thoughts. By the time I checked my phone again, the sun was starting to dip below the trees. It was after 5 p.m. My parents had said they'd be back around dinner. I figured I had just enough time to get home and pretend like I'd never left. I said my goodbyes, cut through the alley behind the castle house, and headed down Larch Pine Avenue toward my place. That's when the sinking feeling hit me. You know the one, you're walking into a room and realize you forgot something important. Your stomach tightens before your brain catches up. I walked faster, heart thumping. My house was in view now. The door was closed, but something looked off. My hands were shaking as I stepped up the front stairs. I turned the knob slowly, expecting resistance. It swung open. I stared into the dim foyer, heart racing. The house was quiet, eerily so. My breath caught. I stepped inside, trying to ignore the goosebumps crawling up my arms. The hallway smelled wrong. Not bad, not rotten, but disturbed. Like someone had moved the air in a way that wasn't natural. I slipped off my shoes and called out, "Hello." My voice came out thin and uncertain. Silence. I walked into the kitchen. That's when I saw it. The drawers were open. Every single one. The cabinets, too. Plates, cups, and silverware were scattered across the counter. A bottle of ketchup lay on its side, dripping onto the floor. One of the chairs was knocked over. I froze. This wasn't just weird. It was deliberate. I backed out of the kitchen slowly, my mind racing. Maybe Milo had played a prank before leaving? No, he'd never dare. Maybe my parents had come back early? Then left again? No. I reached for my phone to call someone, my mom, Iver, anyone, but before I could dial, the house phone rang. I turned to stare at the wall-mounted unit in the hallway. We barely used it anymore, but it still worked. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, 000-000-0000. My thumb hovered over the power button on my phone. I knew I should ignore it, but something compelled me to answer. I picked up. At first, nothing. Then breathing. Heavy, ragged, inhuman-sounding. I stayed quiet. My skin crawled. After a few seconds, I said, "Who is this?" The breathing paused. Then a whisper, "I'm in the house." The voice was male. Hoarse. Unfamiliar. I slammed the phone down so fast it nearly bounced off the wall. My heart was in my throat. My first instinct was to run outside and scream for help, but I hesitated. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone from Iver's house had followed me. Maybe it was just a random psycho messing with me. I picked the phone up again and dialed my mom's number. No answer. I tried my dad. Straight to voicemail. Then from upstairs came a sound. Creak. The unmistakable groan of the third step on the landing. I knew it well. Our stairs always creaked in the same place. One step. Then another. Footsteps. Coming toward the stairs. I didn't wait. I bolted out the back door, slamming it behind me. I didn't even grab my phone. My legs burned as I tore across the backyard, hopped the fence, and sprinted into the woods. I ran like something monstrous was right behind me. Maybe it was. I reached the neighboring house, the Mulvers, and pounded on the door until old Mrs. Mulver opened it with a confused look on her face. I must have looked wild, sweaty, panting, pale. "There's someone in my house," I gasped. "I think someone broke in. Please call the police." She didn't ask questions. She led me inside, handed me a glass of water with shaking hands, and dialed the local precinct. The cops showed up about 15 minutes later. I sat in the Mulvers' kitchen while they swept the house. 2 officers went inside while a third stood on the porch and asked me questions. I told them everything, though I could barely keep my voice steady. When the officers returned, they looked grim. "No one's there now," one of them said. "But it looks like someone was." The kitchen was a mess. The back door was unlocked. The upstairs bathroom window was cracked open, like someone had climbed out. But there were no fingerprints, no sign of forced entry. Whoever it was had come and gone like a ghost. My parents came home 2 hours later to a police cruiser in the driveway, and me wrapped in a blanket. They were furious at first, for me leaving, for not locking the door, but when they saw how shaken I was, the anger drained from their faces. That night, I slept on the floor of their bedroom with the lights on. My dad checked every lock 3 times. My mom sat on the edge of the bed, hand on my shoulder, whispering it was going to be okay. But it wasn't okay. Not really. For weeks, I couldn't be in the house alone. Every creak made me jump. I slept with a flashlight in my hand. I kept imagining that whisper, "I'm in the house," echoing over and over in my head. I still don't know who it was. A random intruder? Someone who'd been watching me? Maybe they didn't plan to hurt me at all. Or maybe they did. All I know is that my moment of freedom, the first time I tasted real independence, came with a price. A lesson I won't forget. Always lock the door. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. I was 17, and for the first time ever, I was left entirely alone in our house near Cedarglade Forest, 3 days of uninterrupted solitude. I'd convinced my parents I was mature enough to handle it, and after a bit of back and forth, they finally agreed. They were headed to a regional ceramics expo 2 states away, my little sister too, since she'd recently taken up pottery like it was her destiny. I, on the other hand, couldn't imagine anything more boring than watching people ooh and ah over slightly lopsided vases. So that Friday afternoon, I waved goodbye from the porch as their hatchback disappeared down the road, tires kicking up gravel as it curved toward the highway. I waited until they were out of sight before I let out the breath I'd been holding. The house was mine. Mine alone. Our house sat on the edge of a heavily wooded area, just past the outer rim of the small town of Drellmere. To some, that would be reason enough to keep the lights on 24/7 and install 6 security cameras. To me, it was perfect. I loved the stillness of the woods, the way it breathed with the wind, whispered in the night. That first evening, I relished every second of my freedom. I ordered takeout from my favorite diner, played my music way too loud, and flopped on the couch with a double-feature horror movie marathon. Ironically, watching creepy films while alone in the woods didn't even register as a bad idea. Not yet. Around midnight, I brushed my teeth, locked all the doors, like a responsible temporary adult, and headed upstairs to my room. The house settled with soft pops and creaks, nothing unusual. The autumn air had cooled fast, and I cracked my window to let it in. I fell asleep quickly, tucked under layers of blankets, the muffled hoots of owls and rustling branches lulling me into dreams. It was the second night when things changed. I spent the day inside mostly. The sky had turned gray and heavy, casting long shadows across the living room. I watched more movies, caught up on some school reading, and made a frozen pizza that somehow ended up half burnt and half raw. But that night, as I lay in bed, I woke suddenly, like I'd been nudged from sleep. My eyes opened to darkness and the faint scent of cedar from the woods. For a moment, I thought I'd just stirred for no reason. But then the sensation hit me again. I was being watched. It's not something you can explain logically. There were no footsteps, no creaks or whispers, just that tightening in your gut. That primal alertness that says, you are not alone. I sat up, slowly scanning the room. Moonlight spilled across the floor in a silver stripe, and the shadows danced along the far wall as trees swayed outside my window. I convinced myself it was nothing, maybe a weird dream clinging to me. I lay back down, pulled the blanket higher, and eventually fell asleep again. The third night was when it all came to a head. The unease started around dusk. I'd barely eaten all day, too jittery to focus. I kept looking toward the back window, half expecting to see something move through the trees. But the forest stayed quiet, still. Too still. I double-checked every lock, every window. I even walked around the house with a flashlight, like I was some kind of rookie security guard. Everything seemed normal. By the time I finally tried to sleep, it was almost 2 a.m. I'd left a hallway light on just in case. Not because I was scared, I told myself, just for convenience. Then I heard it. Faint. Soft. Deliberate. Footsteps. Not inside, but just outside the house. Slow crunching on the gravel path that led from the driveway to the backyard. My whole body stiffened. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The sound stopped. I crept to the window and peeked out, the flashlight still in my hand but off. My heart hammered so loudly I thought whoever was outside might hear it. At first, I saw nothing. The moon was out, casting long shadows across the yard. The wind had picked up, making the trees sway gently. Everything was draped in cold silver light. Then, from the edge of the trees, something moved. A figure. It was far enough that I couldn't make out any features. Just a silhouette. A man, tall and narrow, standing just past the tree line, facing the house. He didn't move. Didn't shift or wave or call out. Just stood there, like part of the forest. I blinked. Looked again. Still there. I backed away from the window and locked my bedroom door, though I wasn't sure why. If he was outside, the locks downstairs mattered more. But I couldn't bring myself to go back down. I turned off the lights, crouched beside my bed, and peeked again. Gone. For the next few hours, I sat in the corner of my room, flashlight in one hand and the other gripping my phone so tightly I thought I might crack it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to admit I was scared. Maybe it had been my imagination. Maybe some tree branch just swayed the right way. But at 3:17 a.m., I heard something that left no doubt. A scream. It echoed from the forest behind the house, high-pitched, raw, and inhuman. Not like a person. Not exactly like an animal, either. A sound that didn't belong. The silence afterward was louder than the scream itself. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat near the window with the flashlight pointed toward the trees, though I never saw the figure again. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, I finally left my room and went downstairs, legs aching from sitting so long. I didn't see anything unusual in the yard. No footprints, no signs of anyone near the house. But the edge of the woods, it felt closer somehow, like the trees had crept in while I wasn't looking. When my parents returned that evening, I didn't tell them the full story. I said I'd heard some animals, maybe a fox or coyote, and saw a shadow in the trees. My mom looked worried, but not alarmed. My dad laughed it off and said, "See? That's why you don't live in the woods alone." I didn't argue. I didn't want them to think I couldn't handle being on my own. But deep down, I knew what I saw. Weeks passed. I never saw the figure again. I went back to school, spent time with friends, pretended like nothing happened. But I still don't sleep with the window open anymore. I still check the backyard twice before bed, even when I'm not alone. This happened when I was in my final year of high school, and it's something I'll never forget, even though it happened over a decade ago. My parents had gone to a wedding in a neighboring city, Roselatch, and they were staying overnight in a hotel. My older brother, Len, worked the night shift at the time at a small 24-hour warehouse on the edge of town. That meant I was home alone for the whole night. It wasn't a rare occurrence for me, and I actually kind of looked forward to it. We lived in a small city on the East Coast, not the nicest place. The crime rate was high enough that people always kept their doors locked, and sketchy stuff went down every few blocks. But our street was relatively quiet, and I'd grown up there. I knew the creaks of the floorboards and the sounds the radiators made in winter. I was used to being alone. I had my own little routine when I had the place to myself. I'd set up the living room to be my personal hangout. Blankets, snacks, movies, maybe a bit of PlayStation. I'd order Chinese takeout or pizza, drink too much soda, and stay up until the early hours of the morning watching bad horror films or reruns of old sitcoms. That night, it was pizza, pepperoni, and sausage. I had just finished the last slice when I noticed the time, 1:02 a.m. I was half dozing on the couch, half watching some late-night comedy show, with Cecil curled up right next to me. Cecil was our family beagle, and he was old, about 10 at the time. He'd been in our family for years. Honestly, he was more like a piece of furniture than a pet. He never barked, never howled like most beagles do. He mostly just slept or begged for table scraps. He wasn't one of those dogs you expected to save your life. He was more likely to sleep through the end of the world. But that night, he was different. Just as I was about to shut my eyes and maybe call it a night, there was a sound. A bang. Not like a gunshot, but a short, sharp thunk, like something had hit a wall or door. It came from the back of the house, near the alleyway behind our yard. At first, I didn't think much of it. In a city, sounds happen all the time, and you learn to ignore most of them. But Cecil's head shot up. His ears perked, and he stared in the direction of the sound. I reached over and patted him. "It's nothing, buddy. Just someone messing around out back." He didn't move. Then another bang. Louder. Cecil leapt off the couch. I'd never seen him move like that before. He ran straight toward the door that led down to our basement, barking, loud, deep barks I didn't even know he was capable of. He sounded like a different animal altogether. Something primal. My heart was pounding now. His reaction wasn't normal, not for him. Through the barking, I heard it, more banging. Repetitive now. Someone was trying to break in. There was an old, rusted door in the basement that led out into the alley behind our house. It was rarely used and had a stubborn lock that barely worked. Even with the right key, it took some force to open, and someone was on the other side of it, trying, persistently. I stood up fast and looked toward the basement door. Cecil was still going nuts, barking and growling, hackles raised like he was channeling the spirit of some police canine. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't someone trying a door and giving up. This person wanted to get in. My first instinct wasn't to call the cops. I know, it should have been. But I was 17 and stupidly thought I could handle it myself. I was also full of teenage pride and adrenaline, and something inside me said, "You need to protect this house." I ran upstairs to my room, straight to the corner under my bed, where I kept an old wooden baseball bat. My dad had given it to me when I was 8, and while I'd never played much, it had always been there, just in case. This was the in case. I gripped the bat tight and made my way back down the stairs, heart in my throat. I was shaking, not from the cold, but from that horrible realization that someone was really, truly trying to force their way into my house. When I reached the basement door, Cecil was standing at full attention, still barking so ferociously that he started coughing between howls. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the banging stopped. I froze. For a moment, there was only the sound of Cecil's panting and the distant hum of a fridge upstairs. Then I heard it, muffled but clear. A man's voice, shouting a string of curses, full of frustration and rage. Then silence. I waited there for what felt like forever, standing by the basement door with Cecil beside me, both of us breathing heavy. After a few minutes of nothing, I slowly backed away and pulled Cecil with me. I turned on every light on the first floor, double-checked every door and window. Everything else was locked. Eventually, I sat back on the couch with the bat in my lap and Cecil curled up next to me again. His head rested on my thigh, still alert but quieter now. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't call anyone. Looking back, I should have. But I was too stunned. Too freaked out. It didn't even feel real at the time. Like I was stuck in some weird dream. When my brother got home around 6 a.m., I told him everything. At first, he looked at me like I was exaggerating, but when we went downstairs to check the basement door, his face changed. The door practically came off when we touched it. One of the hinges was bent, and the wood near the lock was cracked. Whoever was trying to get in had almost succeeded. He was one shove away from being inside. We never did figure out who it was. We didn't call the police after the fact, though we probably should have. I guess we figured there wasn't much they could do, and we didn't have security cameras or anything useful for evidence. But from that night on, my view of Cecil changed completely. He wasn't just the lazy dog who begged for food. That night, he was a hero. He sensed the danger before I did. He did what I didn't expect him to do. He protected me. People say animals have instincts. I believe it now more than ever. That door was about to break, and I think the only thing that stopped it from opening was Cecil's barking. Whoever was out there must have heard that fury and thought twice. When I tell this story, some people shrug and say, well, that's what dogs are supposed to do. But you don't understand. Cecil had never barked like that in his life. Not once. He was chilled to the point of uselessness most days. But something about that night brought out something deeper. An instinct, a loyalty, maybe even fear. All I know is he saved me. Cecil passed away 2 years later. He was 14, old and tired, and eventually he just couldn't get up anymore. We buried him in the backyard under the big tree, the one he always laid under in the summer. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. And every time I do, I remember that moment, Cecil, barking like a wolf at the door, standing between me and whatever was on the other side. He wasn't just a dog. He was a wall. It was a Tuesday night, quiet, a little too quiet, and I was home alone with my 3 dogs. That wasn't anything out of the ordinary. My parents worked late, and my sister had gone to a study group across town. I had the evening to myself. I lived in a place called Lofter Bay, a sleepy little coastal suburb where the biggest excitement usually came from seagulls fighting over French fries. The houses were spaced out, the backyards opened into thickets of trees and scrubland, and most of the streets ended in dead ends or cul-de-sacs. That night, I was doing what I usually did when left alone, scrolling aimlessly on my phone while a rerun of something forgettable played on the TV. I wasn't really paying attention. The room was dimly lit, the dogs were scattered around the living room, one at my feet, one on the rug, and the third curled up on the windowsill. I was on FaceTime with my friend Clara, just chatting about nothing important. I swear, Clara said through the screen, if I have to hear Mr. Vallis say economic elasticity one more time, I'm going to dropkick a textbook. I laughed and rolled onto my side, the phone wobbling in my hand. You're the one who signed up for AP Econ. Yeah, and I regret everything. That was the last normal moment. Because then I heard it. A faint sound. Not inside, but close. A shuffling or maybe a light scrape. The dogs reacted instantly. Ears perked, bodies lifting from the floor in perfect unison, like they were connected to some invisible alarm system. They all turned toward the back of the house. Then they started barking. Not just casual, someone's outside barks. These were deeper, more frantic, the kind of barking that makes your heart rate spike even before your brain has time to process why. I muted the TV and sat up straighter. Hang on, I told Clara, and walked to the back of the living room, toward the sliding glass door that led to the yard. The curtain was halfway drawn, the glow from the interior lights reflecting just faintly off the glass. I reached for the curtain, expecting to see maybe a raccoon, a wandering cat, or even one of the neighbors cutting through our yard like they sometimes did. I pulled it back, and there he was. A man. He was standing just on the other side of the sliding glass door, inches away from the glass. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't even seem surprised that I had seen him. He just stood there, tall, thin, dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, and stared. Right at me. I froze. It was like my entire body stopped working for a second. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and my mind scrambled for logic, for context, for something that would make this make sense. But nothing did. The man didn't react to the dogs, who were now in a frenzy, their paws scrabbling at the glass, their growls vibrating through the room. He didn't acknowledge them at all. His eyes never left mine. Clara's voice crackled from the phone in my hand. Hello? You still there? I unmuted the call, my voice coming out shaky. Clara, there's a man at the door. What? At the back. He's just standing there. He's looking at me. Are you serious? What the hell? Call the cops. Right now. Ah, yeah. Okay. I lowered the phone and unlocked it, my fingers fumbling with the screen. The man still didn't move. I hadn't blinked in what felt like forever. Then he did something worse than moving. He smiled. Not a big, toothy grin. Not a friendly or goofy smile. It was a tight-lipped, knowing smirk that barely shifted the corners of his mouth, but felt like it screamed at me. And then his lips started moving. He wasn't saying anything out loud. He was mouthing something, over and over. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. I leaned in slightly, against every instinct in my body, trying to read his lips. And I realized what he was saying. Don't look away. He kept mouthing it, again and again. Don't look away. Don't look away. Don't look away. I finally tore my gaze away long enough to dial 911. The dispatcher answered immediately, and I gave them my address and explained what was happening as calmly as I could. The whole time, I could feel him still staring at me. I walked slowly backwards toward the front of the house, phone to my ear, the dog still barking at the glass. The one had started whining like even he didn't want to face what was out there. "I'm sending officers now," the dispatcher said. "Do not open the door. Stay inside and away from any windows. Are all your doors locked?" "Yes. I think. I'll check. Stay on the line with me, okay?" I nodded even though she couldn't see me, eyes flicking back toward the glass. He was still there, watching, still smiling, still mouthing those words. I ran to the front door, checked the lock, secure. The side door, the garage door, every latch and bolt. All sealed. I moved back toward the living room slowly, phone still to my ear, heart slamming in my chest. He was still there, but now he was slightly closer to the glass. His breath was starting to fog the surface, and he hadn't stopped mouthing the words. "Don't look away." I felt paralyzed, like there was some unseen thread connecting my eyes to his, like if I broke it something unspeakable would happen. I couldn't blink. I couldn't breathe. Then, finally, off in the distance, I heard sirens. I never thought I'd be so relieved to hear them. But the man heard them too. For the first time since I'd seen him, he reacted. His head tilted slightly toward the sound. His expression darkened. Then, without breaking eye contact, he turned and ran. He moved fast. Faster than I thought a person could move from a standing position. 1 second he was there. The next he was a blur disappearing into the trees at the back of the yard. By the time the officers arrived and swept the property, he was long gone. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, nothing. He had come and gone like smoke. The police told me it was likely just a disturbed person passing through. Maybe someone off their meds. Maybe someone high. But I knew better. This man, whoever he was, hadn't been high. Or drunk. Or confused. He knew what he was doing. He came to my house for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it wasn't good. I haven't been able to look out the sliding door the same way since. I never leave the curtain open at night. Never sit with my back to the glass. This happened when I was 16, and I was home alone for the night. My parents had gone to a benefit dinner for my dad's company, something they'd been planning for a couple of weeks. The venue was 2 towns over, and the event ran late, so they were staying at a hotel nearby. My older sister, Marla, was staying at her best friend's place for the weekend. I didn't mind being by myself. In fact, I kind of looked forward to it. I had plans. I was going to order food, maybe start that game I'd been meaning to try, and just enjoy not having anyone telling me to turn the volume down or asking me to help with laundry. We lived in a 2-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac in a quiet suburban neighborhood in a place called Corwin Ridge. Most of the houses looked the same, white siding, tall trees, lots of hedges. People kept to themselves, and while we weren't close to our neighbors, it was the kind of place where nothing really ever happened. At least, that's what I thought. That night, things started off normal. I made myself a frozen meal and ate on the couch while watching a movie. The kind of movie that's not good, but you watch it anyway because it's there. It was around 9 p.m. when I first noticed it. A sound. I paused the movie because I thought I heard something coming from the front of the house. Like someone trying the front door. It wasn't loud. Just a faint rattle. Like the doorknob was being tested gently. I got up slowly and walked toward the front hallway. My bedroom was upstairs, and from there I couldn't hear a thing, so this was the first time I'd really paid attention to anything outside. I crept to the front window and peeked out. Nothing. The porch light was on. The street was quiet. No people. No movement. I stood there for a moment, listening. Silence. I went back to the couch, telling myself I'd imagined it. Maybe the house settling. Maybe wind. I pressed play on the movie again, trying to ignore how the sound had made my stomach feel tight. A few minutes later, it happened again. Only this time, it wasn't subtle. 3 knocks. Loud. Deliberate. Right at the front door. I paused the movie again and stood up, frozen in place. My mouth was suddenly dry. I waited to hear something else. Another knock. A voice. Anything. But there was only silence. I walked carefully to the front window again and looked out. No one was there. I checked the other windows that faced the front yard. Nothing. The door hadn't moved. It was still locked. Nothing was tampered with. The motion light on the porch hadn't even turned on. I told myself maybe it was a prank. Some kid doing a late-night version of Ding Dong Ditch. But I hadn't heard any footsteps running away. I hadn't heard anyone laugh. And the way those knocks sounded, they weren't playful. They were slow, heavy. I sat back down, but this time I muted the TV and turned the volume on my phone all the way up. I texted my friend Eli just to have someone to talk to. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I said something casual. Me, hey, you up? Eli, yeah, what's up? Me, someone just knocked on my door. Kinda weird. Eli, this late? That's messed up. Me, I checked. No one was there. Eli, maybe it was a squirrel, lol. Me, squirrels don't knock. He didn't reply to that, and I just stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. That's when I heard the back door creak. I knew that sound. Our back door sticks a little, so you really have to pull it hard to get it open. The creak it makes is long and specific, like an old swing set that hasn't been oiled. My heart dropped. This time, I didn't even hesitate. I got up, grabbed the nearest object I could find, a lamp, and walked quickly to the kitchen where the back door was. I flicked on the lights. Everything looked normal. The back door was shut. I walked over and checked the handle. Still locked. I breathed a little easier. Maybe the noise was just my nerves. The house creaking again. I didn't want to scare myself more than I already had, so I did another sweep of the house. I checked all the doors, all the windows. Locked. Still, I felt off. I decided to go upstairs. I figured being in my room would help me feel safer. I could shut the door, throw on headphones, and wait out the night. Once I got to my room, I tried to forget about it. I put on a hoodie, turned on some music low, and scrolled through my phone. After a while, I felt like maybe I had overreacted. It was late. I was alone. My brain was just filling in blanks. I even laughed at myself for texting Eli like it was something serious. And that's when I heard it. The back door again. But this time, it wasn't a creak. It was the sound of it opening. I froze. I hadn't unlocked it. I walked over to my bedroom window, which faced the side yard, and looked out. From that angle, I couldn't see the back door clearly. I moved slowly to my bedroom door, opened it, and listened. Silence. Complete, eerie silence. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe the wind had shifted something. Maybe it had blown a loose shutter. But then I remembered the lock. The tight way the door always held unless it was pulled hard. Something was wrong. I crept down the stairs, slower this time, more cautious. I reached the kitchen and saw what I'd hoped I wouldn't. The back door was wide open. I stopped in my tracks. There was no breeze. No storm. Nothing that could have caused that door to open on its own. Someone had been in the yard. Someone had tried the front door. Now the back door was open. I felt my blood rush to my ears. I shut the door quickly and locked it. Double-locked it. I turned off all the lights on the first floor and backed away from the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and whispered into it as I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone at my house, I said. They've tried the doors. My back door was just open. I'm alone. They asked me questions, address, name, whether I was safe. I told them I was upstairs now. I was going to hide. I went back up to my room and locked my door. I turned off my lights and sat behind the bed, where I couldn't be seen from the hallway. I waited, every nerve screaming. Then I heard something. Footsteps. Not from outside. From inside. Slow, uneven steps, like someone was walking across the hardwood in socks. No shoes. Just soft, padded movements. Moving through the dining room. Then toward the stairs. Then nothing. I held my breath. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. I didn't hear anything else. Then came a knock. Not at the front door. At my bedroom door. It was soft. Just 3 little taps. I didn't respond. Didn't move. I crouched there, clutching my phone, trying to stay quiet. There was no voice. No sound of retreat. Just silence. I think that was worse. It took another 10 minutes before I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. I didn't move until I heard the knock at the front door, and the police announced themselves. I ran down the stairs to let them in. They searched the house. They didn't find anyone. But the back door was still unlocked, and there was mud on the floor leading from the entryway to the hallway, then ending just before the stairs. Like someone had been inside, and then vanished. They couldn't explain it. There was no forced entry, and nothing was stolen. They said maybe someone had been casing the house and ran when they heard me call for help. But the part one couldn't stop thinking about was that knock on the bedroom door. They had been upstairs. They had been right there. My parents came home later that night, scared out of their minds when they got my call. My mom cried. My dad checked every lock himself and installed a camera system the next day. They never caught whoever it was, and I never stayed home alone again. Not by choice. I live alone in a small, one-bedroom ground-floor apartment in a quiet part of town called Cranberville. The kind of place where nothing much happens, and when something does, people talk about it for weeks. My apartment faces the street, with a tiny patch of grass separating the door from the sidewalk. The front door opens directly to the outside. No shared hallway, no buzzer system, just a plain wooden door with a peephole and a short walkway to the curb. There's a street lamp across the road that bathes the whole front area in a dull yellow glow, and a stretch of woods about 50 feet beyond that. It's a nice place overall. Quiet. Affordable. A little isolated, maybe, but I liked that. I had just moved in a few months earlier, and by the time this happened, I had fallen into a comfortable routine. I worked a regular 9-to-5 job, came home, cooked simple meals, watched whatever was trending on streaming, and went to bed around midnight. That's how this night started, like any other. But it ended differently. It was a Thursday, just a typical midweek evening. I came home a little later than usual, because I had stopped by the store to grab groceries. Nothing exciting, frozen meals, snacks, some basic stuff I was running low on. I got in, unpacked everything, put a pot of water on for pasta, and got into my usual evening rhythm. I had music playing low on my phone, and the TV was on mute with the subtitles on in the background. Sometime while the water was boiling, my doorbell rang. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a single chime. A plain, electronic ding-dong. I didn't rush to the door right away, because I had something on the stove. I figured it was probably a delivery person who got the wrong address, or maybe one of the neighbors. After about 20 seconds, I made my way to the front. When I opened the door, there was no one there. I stepped outside and looked up and down the street. Nothing. No cars parked nearby. No people walking away. Just the usual quiet hum of the night. Weird. I shrugged it off and went back inside. I didn't think much of it. It was probably just a mistake, maybe a kid messing around. Stuff like that happens. I'd lived in apartment complexes before where prank doorbell rings were practically a weekly tradition. But this didn't feel like that. Something about the silence afterward, the emptiness, made my skin crawl a little. But I shook it off. The rest of the night went by without anything strange happening. I ate, watched TV, and eventually got tired enough to start turning off lights and get ready for bed. That's when the doorbell rang again. This time it was fast. One ring, then another, then another. 5 in a row. Maybe 6. Ding dong. Ding dong. Ding dong. Ding dong. Ding dong. I froze halfway through brushing my teeth. I stood in the hallway listening, holding my toothbrush like it might be useful for self-defense. The doorbell stopped ringing as suddenly as it had started. I spat into the sink, wiped my mouth, and walked toward the front window instead of the door. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going to just open it. I peeked through the curtains. No one was there. Not even movement. The grass out front was still, the street lamp still glowed, and the sidewalk was completely empty. My stomach tightened. I stood there for a while just watching. Maybe 5 minutes passed. Maybe more. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I finally exhaled and stepped back from the window. I tried to rationalize it again. Could be some late-night delivery going to the wrong address. Could be some bored teenager in the neighborhood. Could be anything. But that didn't explain why I hadn't seen anyone leave. There's nowhere to hide out front, no big bushes or parked cars. It would take at least 10 seconds to walk off the property, and I'd have seen it. That's when I noticed something else. There were faint footprints on the concrete walkway leading up to my door. Damp, barely visible. They weren't there earlier. I locked the door, deadbolt and all, and turned off the lights in the living room. I left one lamp on in the kitchen so I could still see my way around, but otherwise, I went dark. I grabbed a flashlight, just in case the power went out, and kept my phone in my pocket. And still, I didn't call anyone. Not the police, not a friend. Because nothing had happened. Not really. Not yet. It wasn't until I was about to head to bed that I made the mistake of checking the window one last time. It was maybe 1:15 in the morning. I pulled the curtain back just a little, just enough to look out without being obvious. And there was someone standing there. He was tall, thin, wearing a black hoodie and dark jeans. His posture was strange, not casual, not confident, just off. His arms hung by his sides, and his head was turned slightly, not quite facing my door, not quite facing the street. Just kind of listening. I couldn't see his face. The hood cast a shadow that blended with the dim light. But I could see that he was still, completely motionless. I don't know how long I stood there, watching him. Maybe a minute. Maybe more. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He just stood there. Then slowly he turned his head. And I saw his face. He wasn't angry. He didn't look drunk or high or unstable. He just looked calm, almost blank. And his eyes met mine, directly, like he knew I was watching from behind the curtain. That stare stayed with me. He didn't move. He didn't smile or speak or make a sound. Just watched. Then slowly he stepped back, one foot behind the other. Still facing me. He backed up onto the grass. Then onto the sidewalk. Then he turned, without any kind of urgency, and walked across the street. Right into the woods. There's no trail there. No path. Just thick trees and underbrush. The kind of woods people avoid at night, even in good weather. The kind of woods where you get turned around easily, where the only light is from the moon or the distant, flickering glow of the street lamps. But he didn't hesitate. He walked into those trees like he knew them. Like he'd been there before. Like he was going home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light on in the apartment, listening to every creak, every car in the distance, every gust of wind that moved the branches outside. I kept the flashlight next to me. I held my phone in my hand. But I didn't call the police. I didn't know what I'd even say. There's a guy standing outside. He didn't do anything. They wouldn't take that seriously. Hell, I didn't even take it seriously. Until I did. For the next few nights, I didn't hear anything. No knocks. No rings. But every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see him. Sometimes I thought I caught movement in the woods. A flicker of black between the trees. A shadow that didn't belong. One night I sat there for 2 hours, staring at the spot where he'd disappeared. Nothing. Eventually I went to bed. Weeks passed. I told myself it was over. Just a strange encounter. Someone weird passing through. Maybe he thought it was someone else's house. Maybe he was looking for a place to sleep. Maybe anything. I moved on. I even laughed about it with friends later. Told the story like it was a spooky little anecdote. Until 2 weeks ago. That's when it happened again. It was a Wednesday this time. Late. I had just gotten into bed when I heard it. Ding dong. One single ring. I didn't get up right away. I waited. Ding dong. Then silence. I sat up and looked at my phone. 1:08 a.m. I stood slowly, went to the window, pulled back the curtain. No one was there. But in the woods across the street, I saw something. A faint shape. Just between 2 trees. Watching. I haven't seen him since. This happened during my senior year of high school, back when I lived in a house on the edge of a wooded area just outside a town called Merrow's Field. Our backyard was deep, with a gradual slope that led down into dense trees. The first 40 feet belonged to us, the rest faded into public woods with no trail markers, no signs, just wilderness. I never used to be afraid of those woods. I spent hours back there as a kid, building forts, climbing trees, imagining all kinds of adventures. I knew the trees, the way they bent in the wind, the places where the light pooled just right. I knew the silence they held in the early evening hours. I knew their safety. But that changed. It started on a Thursday afternoon in October. I remember that because the air had that perfect chill, and the sky had turned that weird gold it gets in the fall right before sunset. I had just gotten home from school, dropped my bag at the door, and was heading up to my room when I heard a car pull into the driveway. At first, I thought it might be my mom or dad coming home early. But when I looked out the front window, I didn't recognize the vehicle. It was a large, black SUV. Not a new one, older, a little beat up. Tinted windows. It didn't park close to the house like visitors usually did. It stopped at the very end of the driveway, just before the gravel turned to grass. My first instinct was to stay out of sight, which I know sounds paranoid, but something about that vehicle didn't sit right with me. Then the doors opened. 4 men stepped out. Not boys. Not teens. Men. All of them were wearing dark clothing. Nothing flashy, but they looked out of place. One had a gray hoodie with the hood up. Another wore a dark flannel. The others had on plain jackets. But their clothes looked too heavy for the weather. Like they weren't dressed for the temperature, but for something else. None of them looked around like they were lost or trying to find the right house. They knew where they were. They didn't go to the front door. Instead, I watched, heart pounding, as they walked around the side of our house, heading toward the backyard. One man remained in the driver's seat. And a few moments later, The SUV backed out of the driveway and slowly drove away down the road. At that point, I knew something was wrong. I moved away from the window, grabbed my phone, and went upstairs to my room. From my window, I had a view of the backyard and the first edge of the woods. The four men were there, standing in a loose circle near the tree line. They weren't talking, not that I could see. One of them was pointing at something in the trees. Another crouched, ran his fingers through the grass. I didn't have binoculars, but I could see their movements well enough. I called my mom. She was stuck in traffic. Said she and my dad were about an hour away. I didn't want to panic her, but I told her, "There are guys in our backyard. I don't know who they are." They came in an SUV and then went into the trees. She didn't hesitate. "Call the police." So I did. The dispatcher was calm. Took my address. Told me to stay on the line and stay inside. I ducked down by the window, still watching. After a minute or two, the men began walking deeper into the woods, fading out of sight one by one. No rush. No sign of fear. Just disappearing into the trees like they belonged there. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. I went downstairs and let them in, then told them everything. They walked the property, looked around the backyard, scanned the edge of the woods. But they didn't find anyone. The footprints were too faint. The woods too dense. Whoever they were gone. The officers took my statement, gave me a kind but skeptical look, and told me to call again if I saw them return. My parents got home not long after the police left. My mom was rattled. My dad was quiet in that, trying not to scare anyone more kind of way. They double-checked all the locks. Made sure the back door was secure. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking out the window into the backyard. The woods, dark and endless, stared back. The next day felt strange. I went to school like usual, but I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about the men, the way they didn't knock, the way they didn't talk, the way they just vanished. When I got home, I felt that same tightness in my stomach as I approached the house. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately checked the backyard. It was empty. Still, I kept the doors locked and stayed on the main floor. Later that afternoon, I went to my room and started on some homework. I was sitting at my desk, facing the window. That's when I saw him. One of the men from the day before. He was standing in the same spot at the edge of the woods. Just standing there. Looking at the house. Looking at me. I ducked out of view immediately, heart pounding. I didn't know if he saw me. I crawled to the other side of the room, then peeked back out from behind the curtain. He was gone. I called the police again. They came, searched again. Walked the yard. Checked the woods. Still nothing. This time, one of the officers gave me a look I didn't like. Like maybe I was wasting their time. Like maybe I was overreacting. But I wasn't. I knew what I saw. After that, I didn't see the men again. But the feeling didn't go away. The sense that I was being watched. I started avoiding the backyard. I kept my curtains shut. I didn't sleep well for weeks. We installed a floodlight. A motion sensor. My dad considered putting up a camera, but he never got around to it. The men never came back. Or if they did, I never saw them. But I'll never forget the way they moved. Calm. Purposeful. Like they weren't scouting. Like they weren't random. Like they were waiting for something. Or someone. And I just happened to notice them before they were ready. To this day, I still think about it. Who were they? Why my house? What were they doing in the woods? What if I hadn't been home? Or what if I had gone outside? I don't know the answers. This happened when I was 12, and I still remember every second of it more clearly than things that happened last week. It's one of those moments where your brain records everything, every sound, every smell, every inch of movement, and plays it back again and again like it wants to make sure you never forget. It was summer. Not quite the scorching part, but still warm enough that the sun hung heavy in the sky and the air carried the buzzing of insects. My parents were both at work, and my older brother, Levi, was out with friends. That left me home alone for the day. I was the kind of kid who didn't mind being by myself. I liked reading. I liked quiet, and that day was perfect for it. We had a chair in the front yard. It was one of those old, cheap plastic ones with the legs that bend a little too easily. I dragged it out under the tree by the edge of our driveway, sat down with a book in my lap, and got lost in the pages for what must have been close to an hour. That's when I noticed the car. It was a black sedan. 4-door. Old, maybe early 2000s. Not in bad shape, but definitely used. It came down the street slowly. Not suspiciously slow, just enough to catch my attention. We lived on a quiet block in a neighborhood called Kellam Bay, and usually the only cars we saw were people who lived there or the occasional delivery truck. I watched it roll by. It didn't stop, didn't hesitate, just passed my house and disappeared down the street. I went back to my book, though I found myself rereading the same paragraph over and over again. A minute later, I heard a car engine again. The same sedan was back. This time it was coming from the opposite direction. It passed by slower, and this time the driver looked right at me. I only saw him for a second. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just a quick, direct glance. Then the car was gone again. Now I was paying attention. Something about that felt wrong. I told myself maybe he was lost. Maybe he was looking for an address and had made a wrong turn. But it still didn't sit right. 5 minutes passed. Then the car came back. Again. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up as it rolled past. This time, it was so slow I could have jogged beside it. It kept moving, turned the corner, and disappeared from sight. That's when I decided to go inside. I didn't run, didn't panic. I just picked up my book, stood calmly, and walked into the house through the front door. I locked it behind me. Once inside, I poured myself a glass of water, trying to act normal. But my ears were straining, listening, waiting. I went to the front window, pulled back the curtain just an inch, and looked out. The car was back, parked in my driveway. Not close to the house, not even at the top of the drive. It was parked at the very edge, right where the concrete met the sidewalk. As if whoever was inside didn't want to fully commit to being at the house, but also didn't want to leave. I couldn't see the driver clearly from my angle. The sunlight was hitting the windshield in just the right way to reflect everything. But I saw the shape of a person in the driver's seat. They weren't moving, just sitting there. I backed away from the window and walked through the house, checking the back door, making sure it was locked. I didn't have a cell phone at the time. My parents didn't think I needed one yet. But we had a landline in the kitchen, and I knew where it was. I was going to call someone. But before I did, I decided to check one more time. Just to be sure. I went to a side window, one that had a better angle of the driveway. And the car was empty. The driver was gone. I froze. My first thought was that he was walking up to the door, but when I looked at the porch, nothing. I checked the front windows again. Still no one. Then from the hallway I heard something. A creak. From the floorboards upstairs. My bedroom was on the second floor. So was Levi's. My parents' room. A bathroom. I didn't know what to think. There was no reason anyone should be up there. I stood in the center of the living room, holding my breath. And then I did something I still don't fully understand. I went to my bedroom. I moved slowly, step by step up the stairs. At the top, the hallway stretched in both directions. Nothing. No sounds. No movement. I walked to my room and pushed the door open. Empty. Everything looked normal. I turned to go back downstairs. And that's when I saw him. He was standing just outside the window, looking right at me. We locked eyes for less than a second before I turned and ran. I didn't scream. I didn't even think. I just ran. I sprinted down the stairs, straight into the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and started dialing 911. As the phone rang, I moved to another window that faced the side of the house. I saw him running, back toward his car. He rounded the corner and jumped in. The engine started, tires squealed, and the car peeled away from the driveway. He was gone before the dispatcher even answered. The police came. They took a report. They asked me what he looked like, what kind of car it was. I told them everything I could. My parents were called home from work early. I remember sitting on the couch while the officer told my mom they'd patrol the area for the next few days. But without a plate number, there wasn't much they could do. The man was gone. Nothing was taken. Nothing was broken. But something was lost that day. I lost the version of myself that felt safe reading outside in the sun. I lost the version of myself that believed scary things didn't happen in nice neighborhoods. And I lost the ability to sleep with my blinds open. To this day, I still wonder what he wanted. What he was doing while I was inside, unaware. How long he had been watching me before I noticed. And if I had stayed outside even 1 minute longer, would he have tried something? Would he have said anything? Would I have made it back inside? I'll never know. And maybe that's the worst part. At the time, it felt like I was just pushing the boundary of what it meant to be grown. You know, that feeling you get when you're a teenager and you think you're invincible, when the rules feel like suggestions and the thrill of doing something wrong outweighs the sense of danger you should probably be feeling. My parents had left that night to pick up my older brother, who had gotten way too drunk at a party across town. They were furious and rushing out the door, throwing on coats and grabbing keys while yelling into the phone. I stood at the top of the stairs, watching the chaos with wide eyes. They didn't even look at me on their way out. "Stay inside," my mom said quickly. "We'll be back in a few hours." I nodded. "Okay." They left around 11:15 p.m. I was officially home alone, for the entire night, as it turned out. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even that surprised when they called an hour later to say they wouldn't be home until morning. My brother had passed out and needed to be taken to the hospital. Alcohol poisoning. They said he'd be fine, but they had to stay. I don't know what happened in my brain next, but it was like the second I hung up the phone, I felt this reckless kind of freedom take over. Nobody was home. Nobody was coming home. The house was mine. I watched some TV, wandered around, thought about calling one of my friends over, but figured it was too late. And then, and I'm not proud of this, I went online. It started innocent, just looking at stuff I knew I wasn't supposed to. Then it escalated. I ended up on one of those sketchy escort sites. I wasn't even sure they were real. But I started messaging one of the profiles. She said her name was Ashley, and she was 19. Her profile photo looked too perfect to be true. Long dark hair, perfect skin, a smile that was either inviting or dangerous, maybe both. Her bio said she was down for anything, no judgment. I sent her a message. Told her I was 15 but mature for my age. She replied, "That's okay. Just don't tell anyone." That should have been the moment I stopped. But I didn't. We exchanged a few more messages. I gave her my address. She said she'd be there in about 45 minutes. At 1:40 a.m., I heard the knock at the front door. I looked through the peephole. She was real, standing right there on my porch. Dark hair, heels, leather jacket. She smiled and waved at the door. My heart was pounding. I was way out of my depth, but I opened the door. She stepped inside and looked around, like she was assessing the space. "Nice place," she said. "Thanks," I said, voice cracking slightly. Her voice was calm, casual, like this was just a job, and she'd done it 100 times before. "I need to use the bathroom real quick," she said. I pointed down the hall. "First door on the left." She went in and shut the door. That's when I looked out at the street. Her car was still idling by the curb, and there was someone else inside. In the passenger seat, barely visible through the tinted window, was a man. He was sitting completely still, facing the house. I stared for a few seconds, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a driver? Maybe a friend waiting for her? But something about it didn't feel right. And then I heard it, outside by the side of the house. Footsteps on the gravel. Someone was walking around to the backyard. Panic set in fast. It hit like cold water. I didn't know what to do. My first thought was to run. My second thought was that I had made a huge mistake. I backed away from the window, moved quickly but quietly to the back of the house. I looked out the kitchen window, and I saw him. The man from the car. He was in the backyard now, moving quickly, trying to stay out of the light. The motion sensor near the shed kicked on, and he froze for a split second. Then he sprinted back toward the front. I ran to the hallway just in time to see Ashley coming out of the bathroom. She looked annoyed. "You scared him off," she said, almost like she was blaming me. "Who?" I asked, playing dumb even though my voice was shaking. She looked at me for a second, then gave a kind of disappointed shrug. "I need to go get him." She walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the night without saying another word. I slammed the door shut behind her and locked it. Then I locked every other door and window in the house. They didn't come back, but the car sat out there for another few minutes before finally driving off. I didn't call the cops. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even talk to anyone about it for years. I was too scared, and too ashamed. The next morning, I went into the bathroom after the sun was up. On the counter, Ashley had left her phone. At first I thought maybe it was on purpose. Then I figured maybe she was in a hurry and forgot it. Either way, I picked it up. There was no lock screen. No password. I opened it. It wasn't her phone. Not really. There were barely any contacts. No social media. Just a long list of messages. The phone was full of text threads, dozens of them, all with area codes I didn't recognize. When I looked them up later, most of them were from overseas. Some from countries known for human trafficking. Others from untraceable, unregistered numbers. The messages were short, cold, transactional. Many of them were about locations, drop-offs, numbers of people, names. Some didn't even use full sentences. They read like codes. The last message was from a number with no contact name. It said, He's too young. Abort. I turned off the phone, put it in a plastic bag, and buried it in the back of my closet. To this day, I don't know what they wanted. But I have a pretty good guess. They weren't just trying to rob me. They weren't here for money or jewelry. They were here for me. And if I hadn't looked out that window at the right moment, if I had let her come back inside, if the man had gotten through the back door, I might not be here to tell this story. I lived in a 2-story house with my parents and my older brother Ian. It was a pretty average neighborhood, not too big, not too small, and most of the houses looked more or less the same. We had a fenced backyard, a couple of trees that were too thin to climb, and a basement that always smelled faintly like old wood and laundry detergent. On this particular night, both my parents were out, something that didn't happen very often. They had dinner plans with some friends and told me they'd be home late. Ian was spending the night at his best friend's house just a few streets over. It was a Thursday, and I remember that clearly because I had school the next day. I also remember that I wasn't really bothered by being alone. I was actually kind of excited about it. There's something weirdly empowering about having the house to yourself at that age. You feel grown up, like you're in charge of something important, even if that something is just deciding what to microwave for dinner and which video game to play. My friend Jason came over around 7 o'clock. His house was only a street away, and he was allowed to stay out until 9 o'clock on school nights. We went up to my room and played games until his phone alarm went off, and he said he had to go. I walked him to the back door, and he slipped out with a casual, "Later, dude." I watched him walk through the yard, out the back gate, and down the sidewalk toward home. I shut the door, locked it, and headed back upstairs. 10 minutes later, I heard the door open again. I was still in my room, sitting back at my desk, and I immediately assumed it was Jason coming back. Maybe he forgot something, or maybe he was trying to scare me for a laugh. That was the kind of thing we did. But I didn't hear any footsteps. No door closing. No dude. Or hey, I forgot my phone. Nothing. Just silence. I waited. Listened. Still nothing. And that's when the feeling hit me. That slow, creeping sense that something was off. Like your brain hasn't fully pieced it together yet, but your body already knows. I got up, left my room, and stood at the top of the stairs. From there, I could see the living room and a bit of the hallway below. No movement. Still I called out, "Jason." No answer. I went down a few steps. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of old wood. I got to the bottom of the stairs and walked through the living room, heart thudding a little louder now. The back door was shut. Locked. But I was sure, absolutely certain, that I had heard it open earlier. I started doing a walkthrough of the house. Not because I really expected to find anything, but because I needed to convince myself that nothing was there. I checked the kitchen, the front door, the windows, all locked, all normal. I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe I hadn't latched the door all the way, and the wind pulled it. Maybe it made a noise I misinterpreted. I went back to my room, sat down, started playing again. Not even 5 minutes passed when I heard it. The knock. 3 quick raps on the front door. I paused the game and stood up. Who knocks at 9:15 on a Thursday? I walked back downstairs, slower this time, and peeked out the small side window near the front door. No one. I went to the bigger window that faced the porch. Still no one. I waited there for a few minutes, looking out into the stillness. Eventually, I stepped away from the glass and headed back toward the kitchen. That's when I heard it again. This time, not from the front. From the back. A sound I still can't fully explain. Not a knock. Not footsteps. Just a presence. The sense that someone was behind the door. I didn't go to the back door right away. I walked over to the dining room window that faced the backyard. I pulled the curtain just slightly to the side and looked out. At first, I saw nothing. But then, just at the edge of our property, I saw movement. A figure. Someone walking away from the house, slipping into the darkness beyond the trees. It was too dark to see clearly. Just a shape, tall and quiet, blending into the shadows. I stood there frozen. Had he been standing at the door? Watching? I finally backed away and made sure the door was locked. Then I ran upstairs and texted Jason. Me, you didn't come back to my place just now, right? Jason, no, why? Me, someone was at the door. Jason, what? Like a neighbor? Me, I don't think so. Jason, call your parents. Me, they're at dinner. I'll be fine. Jason, dude, just call the cops if it gets weird. I didn't want to call the cops. Not yet. I still wasn't sure if what I saw was real. If maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I tried to calm down. I stayed in my room, watching the hallway, door shut, lights off. I told myself that was it. Whoever it was, they had gone. And then I heard it. The sound of the back door creaking open. This time, no mistaking it. No pretending. It was the same groaning hinge I'd heard 100 times before, unmistakable. Someone had come inside. I grabbed the cordless phone from my desk and ran into my parents' bedroom across the hall. I locked the door and crawled under the bed. I called 911. Whispered my name and address to the operator. Told her someone was in the house. She told me to stay on the line. To stay quiet. I lay there in the dark, phone to my ear, heart beating so loud I thought the person outside the door could hear it. And then, after a few minutes of silence, I heard it. A single knock at the bedroom door. It wasn't loud. Just soft. Measured. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't in a hurry. The knock was followed by a few seconds of silence. Then nothing. No footsteps. No voice. No sound at all. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. I heard them knocking on the front door, calling out. I crawled out from under the bed, opened the window, and yelled that I was upstairs. They cleared the house. But the man was gone. The back door was still open. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But he had been there. They never found out who it was. No fingerprints. No forced entry. Just an unlocked door and a missing shadow. I didn't sleep in my room that night. I didn't sleep at all. For weeks after, I checked every lock twice. I kept a flashlight under my pillow. I jumped at every creak. And I stopped inviting people over. Because now I always wonder, what if Jason had come back 5 minutes later? What if I had opened that door? What if I hadn't locked it when I did? I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted. But I know he wasn't there by mistake. And I know, beyond a doubt, that if I hadn't hidden, if the police hadn't come,